So we've got this 2-year journey that we've kind of been on of exploring what's next, what God has for us. And so Chris is going to come up and he's going to talk to us about their impact model of how they do church multiplication, church planting, church replanting, the type of stuff we've been talking about. And so we've just started some conversation with them about what it could look like to be a part of the work that they've been attempting to do around Indianapolis, and how they can resource that, and how they can help this place be a neighborhood church that has a heart for the people that are in this community, who live nearby, who may or may not look like us, who may or may not have the history that we have. And so, Chris, I'm just going to ask you to come up and share some of your story, share how Impact got started, and after that, we'll have some more conversation.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, let me just give you a little bit of brief information about me. I was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I went to Ozark Bible College. At the time, it's called Ozark Christian College, now in Joplin, Missouri, and graduated in 1980. Moved to Houston, Texas, where my family lived at the time, and got a job as a youth pastor. Never really wanted to be a youth pastor. I just wanted to be a preacher. But I was 21 years old and single, and so I was a youth pastor, and I got fired from my first church. I was there for 18 months, and I got canned. And so that was a great thing that happened to me because I really did want to be, and there's a long story, and it was not my fault. You just have to trust me. And so it gave me an opportunity to plant a church. And so there was an area of Houston called Sugar Land, and literally Sugar Land because the sugar factory was there. And I had 30 people, and we planted a church in 1982. Now, a long time ago, I just turned 65, so long time ago. And this is when you planted church the old-fashioned way. There was no help, no money, no nothing. It was like sink or swim every week. And so I stayed there for almost 11 years. And nothing really particularly dramatic happened. The church grew from 30 to 250. And then I moved back to the Tulsa area where I'm from. And I took a church that was in trouble. Had about 125 people, had just gone through a church split, and that was like the 4th or 5th church split in its history. Just really troubled. And I stayed there for about 10 years, and the church went from 125 to 1,000, and it was a great ministry. And in 2001, I got a phone call from one of the elders at Mount Pleasant Christian Church inquiring about whether or not I'd be interested in being their next pastor, and obviously I ultimately said yes, and we moved. And I began that ministry, at the beginning of November in 2001. And Mount Pleasant is just a great church, tremendous church, full of wonderful people, and it's experienced great growth and has a variety of different ministries. In many ways, it's a very typical suburban megachurch. But I've always had a heart for small churches and small church pastors because I grew up in a very small church. Because for the first half of my life in ministry, I was a part of a small church. And so that's always stayed with me. And I've always had a heart for serving through the church. And one of the things Mount Pleasant does really, really well is we serve our community in so many ways. But one of the ways is we had a house on a piece of property down the road from our church that we turned into a food pantry. And there was a woman in church who was just relentless with me saying, we need a food pantry, we need a food pantry, we need a food pantry. And I will be honest in telling you, I never thought we needed a food pantry, ever. And then it was like, we need a clothing ministry, we need a clothing ministry. And I thought, we don't need a clothing ministry. I don't think of Johnson County as a place where people are in really desperate situations. But to be honest with you, and this doesn't say a lot about my leadership, she just wore me down. And I finally just said, if you'll do it, okay, we'll make space available. And so we had a couple of houses, and one became a food pantry and one became a clothing ministry. And folks, they both just blew up. I mean, they just blew up. It was amazing how many people started coming week after week after week. It was just incredible. I'm giving you a short version of this story. So we ended up, the last time we did any kind of a building expansion in our church, one of the things we built is we built a 15,000 square foot building on the back of our property. We had to buy some houses that were behind our church. The county let us remove the road. We extended our property that way, which would be south. And we built, one of the things we built was this impact center. And So if you walk in, it's got an open room, that's not as wide as this, but kind of similar to this. And then on one side, there's like a grocery store. And on the other side, it's basically like a thrift store where you have clothing and household needs. And in the back is just a gigantic warehouse. And we started having what we call Impact Thursday and Impact Saturday. And we'd have we called them sessions in the beginning, 3 sessions on Thursday, morning, afternoon, and evening, and we'd have 1 session on Saturday morning. And so we just had hundreds and hundreds of people coming every single week. And I used to go out there in the very beginning, and I would share a devotion, for 10 or 15 minutes. And I would open up my Bible, and I would share from the scriptures, and the people were so engaged and so involved. It was very moving to me. And I'll be honest with you and tell you that sometimes I would go out there on a Thursday, and I would come back thinking, that felt more like church to me than what we did on Sunday. And that's not a criticism of my church, okay, at all. The reason why I said that, I really want you to understand, I love my church deeply. It's not any kind of a criticism of my church. But what really stood out to me was that those people had no pretense about them at all. They were very real and very open and very vulnerable and very raw. And they would tell you their life story in 30 seconds, some of the most horrific things. And it was just real. And our volunteers were out there, and they were praying with people, and just incredible things were happening. And so we hired Steve Saunders ultimately to run that ministry, and he became the Impact pastor. And all the people who would come on Thursday and Saturday, they viewed Steve as their pastor because they viewed that as their church. That was their church. And Steve was preaching to him from the Word. We were taking up an offering every week. We were singing. Food was being shared. Sometimes we would offer the Lord's Supper in unusual circumstances or different kinds of circumstances. And it was just church. He was performing weddings. He was baptizing people. He was doing funerals. It was every bit as much of a church as anything else that we were doing. So we stopped calling those sessions. We called them services. And so we'd have a morning service, an afternoon service, and an evening service on Thursday, and we'd have a morning service on Saturday. And Steve would tell you, in the beginning, he had a church congregation of about 600 or 700 people. And he was ministering to them just like any pastor in any church ministered to people. And it was just an incredible thing. And so one day I was out there, and remember, I have this heart for small churches and small church pastors. And so one day I was out there, and I was thinking, and I was talking to different people, and I was finding out where they were from, and people were coming from, you would think they would just be coming fairly locally, but they come from everywhere, don't they, Steve? And so I thought, well, how do we take this other places? How do we do the same thing other places? And long story short, that got me having a conversation with a guy named Jay Height, who runs Shepherd Community, which is a ministry in downtown Indianapolis, been there forever. And he was telling me about a neighborhood just south of downtown. And in the beginning, we called that, I can't remember what we called it. Concord neighborhood. But when we started really investigating it, we found out it's not so much Concord as it's known as Old South Side. And so we targeted Old South Side to try to take this model of what we were doing on our campus in Greenwood and doing it somewhere else. And so after a lot of thought and a lot of conversation, a lot of prayer, I decided that, we would adopt this model. I shared it with our elders. Our elders were on board. And I would say we would do 3 things in this neighborhood. We would live in the neighborhood, the Old South Side neighborhood. We would learn about the neighborhood, and we would love the neighborhood. And so we hired a pastor, and we bought a house in the Old Southside neighborhood, and we moved his family in there. He had 3 children. They homeschooled their kids, and so schooling wasn't going to be an issue. They would just be able to do that there. We remodeled that house. They moved in, and he began to live in the neighborhood. He began to learn about the neighborhood, and he began to love the neighborhood with some volunteers and servants from Mount Pleasant. And then we located a building. The building's right on Meridian. Years and years ago was the old Washington Theater, but when we found it, it had been converted, and it was a paint company, and it was just all cut up and made into offices and different warehouse space. It's not a particularly large building because there's not a lot of buildings available in that area. But we bought it, and we remodeled it, and we opened it up. And when we opened it up, we started a church down there. So we had what we called Impact Old Southside Christian Church. And it's right on Meridian. You've probably driven past it before. And we started having church, and they do church different at Impact Old Southside. They do church at night. They call it dinner church. And people come, and they sit around tables just like this, and they share a meal, and then there's a church service that goes along with it. They have a youth outreach to the community, which is tremendous. Just tremendous how many kids come to this youth outreach. They have recovery and support groups. They have a food co-op, or they had a food co-op, and now they're doing something different, right, Steve? So we basically have a food pantry through Impact Old Southside, and it's just turned into a really dynamic ministry right in the middle of a really difficult area. And about the same time, I was reading through my Bible, and I was reading John chapter 1, but I was reading it from the Message, which is a paraphrase of the Bible more than it is a translation. And the very first part of John chapter 1 and verse 14 in the Message says about Jesus, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And I thought, that's it. That's what we're doing. That's what we want to do. We want to move into these underserved, under-resourced neighborhoods, or these neighborhoods that have changed demographically, have changed dramatically, and be Jesus in those neighborhoods. And so after Old Southside, we kind of set our attention on some difficult neighborhoods, and we identified the neighborhood of Fairfax. How would you describe where Fairfax is, Steve?
South of Speedway, west of Hawville.
South of Speedway, west of Hawville.
Tibbs in Michigan.
Tibbs in Michigan.
That's where I started church.
Okay, you went to Fairfax Christian Church? All right, God bless you. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. Well, in this Fairfax neighborhood was Fairfax Christian Church, and it was a church that had declined to where there was only about 30 or 40 people that were still attending, and the offerings couldn't, keep up with the operational needs, and they were going to, they came to the conclusion that they were going to either have to, take a dramatic step, or they were just going to close the doors and go away. And so I started having conversations with their elders, and they actually had a pastor on staff at the time, and we had multiple conversations that led to me coming to their church one Sunday morning and sharing a message like I just did for you. I shared a message about the woman who had the bleeding disorder that reached out and touched the hem of Jesus' garment and was healed. And then I stayed around, and I just shared with them what would happen if they decided, rather than closing their doors and going away, they gave their church to us, and we made it an impact ministry site. Which is what they did. They voted unanimously to do that. They turned it over to us, and now Fairfax Christian Church is Impact Fairfax Christian Church. And they are more vibrant and more vital in that neighborhood than they've probably been in decades. In fact, Steve, would you come up here for just a moment? And the reason why is because Steve and his wife, Julie, they attend Impact Fairfax Christian Church. And so can you just give a little bit of an overview of what a week looks like in the Fairfax neighborhood?
Fairfax neighborhood is a very impoverished, needy neighborhood. So the outreach that we do throughout the week is vital to just being a gospel presence throughout that community. So Wednesday nights is one of our busiest evenings. We have a community meal, which had been a part of what Fairfax Christian Church had been doing for years and years. But in addition to that, we have a pantry time that they can come, and we also set up a clothing ministry there as well. And just like the Impact Center model that Chris mentioned, there's a message time. So they're given the gospel, they're given the Word of God, and we have anywhere between 120 and 140 people that come each week to be a part of that. We're very active in addiction recovery and health services. So we have a large AA meeting that we see it as a means to develop relationships. And that's really the whole point of the blessings that God has given us through food and clothes and buildings and volunteers. It's all to develop relationships, to understand people's stories, to point them towards Jesus, right? To live, to learn, and to love them the way Jesus would. And then on Sundays at Fairfax, we have a traditional service. It's grown from 30 to 40 to now we're between 80 and 100, and we're seeing many people that are coming on Wednesdays now being a part of that community on Sundays. So it's really been exciting to see what all that God has been doing.
Yeah, and there's a really active youth program that is happening. So a church that had no children now has what?
We have about 30 kids that show up on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
And we have a busload that just returned from Colorado. So there's a trip that we've taken in the last 2 years, taking close to 60 students from all of our different impact campuses to Colorado to National Youth Roundup. I haven't gotten the full update, but I know we had 4 baptisms earlier this week, so looking forward to find out what news came out of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, this church has just been transformed. And the thing about it is what we really want to see happen is really the idea of John 1:14. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Jesus making a difference in a neighborhood like hasn't happened in years. When I first went to Fairfax, one of the first things the guys who were there did was they took me outside, just right out the back door, and there was a house sitting right next to the church. I mean, just across the alley. I mean, as close as I am to that brown wall right there was this house. And it was just a dump. And they said, this house is a blight on this neighborhood. This house is a source where drugs are sold, where prostitution happens. Any bad thing you can think of, it happens in that house. And it's been happening for years and years and years. It's a danger to the children in our community. It is the Indianapolis Police Department received calls to come to this house. They told me at the time more than any other location in the city. It was that bad. And I remember just because sometimes I just blah, 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 so I just talk without thinking. And I said, if we move forward, we'll buy that house. We'll buy that house and we'll change it. So I didn't have any permission to do that or anything, but I said that's what we do. And so we carried on anyway. They gave the church to us. And I want to be clear about what that means. They didn't say we're going to enter into a merger with you. They turned their church completely over to us. It wasn't a merger, it was an acquisition. I know that sounds heavy-handed, just in words and terminology, but you have to understand our heart. And if you would talk to any of these places today, they would tell you that it was just the best decision that they could have made at the time, because of the love and the care and the shepherding that we have for all of those folks in those places. But anyway, after they turned the church over to us, we hired a pastor. And we bought a house in the neighborhood. In fact, it's just across the parking lot from the building. And that house got remodeled. He moved in there with his 3 kids at the time. He's got how many now? 4, okay. I couldn't remember if he had 4 or 5. And so he lives in the neighborhood, began to learn about the neighborhood so we could love the neighborhood. And now we have this dynamic ministry that's going on. And one day, he just happened to meet the guy who actually owned that house. Now, the house had been boarded up many times because it had been condemned by the city, but vagrants and just people with bad motives were breaking into the house and living in it, and things were continuing to happen there that shouldn't happen. And so, make a long story short, after conversation with this guy, he agreed to sell it to us. So I just went to church the next weekend. And at our church, we had this kind of tradition we've done for a while. I found these large clear plastic containers. They're about that tall and about that wide. And I'll set them out on the steps of the platform, and I call them the tip jars. You know how you go into the restaurant, you pick up your food, and they got a tip jar there on the counter? I call them the tip jars. And so when you come to church at Mount Pleasant on the weekend, if you see the tip jars out, I'm going to ask you for some extra money. And so at the end of the service, I just explained the situation. Here is this deal. This is the house. We can buy that house. Let's do it today. Let's do it today. Before you leave, let's all just be generous and give over above our regular giving. And we got $50,000 or $60,000 extra in the offering that day. And so we went and we bought the house. But the thing is that the house, I can't remember the sale price. Let's just say he's going to sell it to us for $20,000, where there was at least that much or more in fees and back taxes and all this kind of stuff. So it ended up costing more. But we bought that house. And then we just boarded it up better than it had ever been boarded up before. And the plan was just, we're going to just level it and take it out. So just remove it completely. So it's never to be seen or thought of again in this neighborhood. But, for whatever reason, and how many God just works in different ways sometimes, right? And I don't dismiss this as a work of God. For whatever reason, we didn't level it right away. It was right before winter came along, and how harsh winter can be here. And so we just boarded up, and we're thinking, well, this is something we'll do in the spring or the summer. And we just kind of let it sit there for a while. And then we learned about this ministry called Isaiah 117, which is a Christian ministry where Christians, they buy these homes and they make them suitable for children who are awaiting placement in foster care. So if somebody comes and takes the children from a home because it's an unsafe situation, there's not always a good place for them to go until they're fostered. And sometimes literally they'll go just to a cold, sterile office building where there's nothing child-friendly at all, and that's where they stay until, they find a place to go. Now, it's not like great lengths of time, but it can be multiple days, and stuff. And so somebody had this heart to start this ministry to place these homes around cities. And they wanted one in Marion County, and they wanted one right in that general area, which makes sense because there's a lot of need for foster care in neighborhoods like that. Long story short, we sold that house to that ministry for $1. And they have flipped it, and the grand opening is August the 13th, and the transformation is incredible. So, hey, tell me, doesn't this sound like God? Beauty from ashes, redemption. And that would have never happened if that church had not moved from being Fairfax Christian Church, we're going to close our doors and go away, to Impact Fairfax Christian Church, now making a significant difference in that neighborhood. Here's the thing about that church. They can't sustain that ministry. They don't have the financial resources to sustain that ministry. They can't cover their overhead. They can't even come close to covering their overhead. But the people at Mount Pleasant are so generous that we have this incredible church campus. I would invite any of you at any time to come visit us, and just during the week, we'll give you a tour. And every single thing you see is completely paid for. We don't owe a dime to anybody for anything. And so we have the resources to do this kind of ministry. And we look at it as a part of our mission. So when we look at our mission budget, we've got our global mission partners, we've got our local mission partners, and a big part of our local mission partners are our impact ministries. So now we've got Impact Old Southside Christian Church, we've got Impact Fairfax Christian Church. We've got great things happening in the Old Southside neighborhood that never happened there before. The ministry of Fairfax has turned around dramatically, and the trajectory is only up. And then there was a church around, gosh, I'm so terrible with directions. Beach Grove area, yeah. Thompson and Sherman, called Bethany Christian Church. Anybody have any familiarity with Bethany Christian Church? 30 or 40 people, couldn't keep the doors open on their own any longer. I started talking with them years ago, but they just were, and I don't say this as a criticism, that's not my heart at all. They were unable to kind of wrap their mind around the idea of an acquisition. They kept thinking in terms of a merger, and I kept saying, it's not a merger, don't misunderstand my heart. We're not just going to give you money to keep doing the same things that you've always done and not making any progress. It's an acquisition. In fact, I just had a meeting with them at one point where I said, listen, I love you guys. We're good. I wish nothing but the best, but I just don't think you're at the place where this is going to happen. I said, what can I do for you? What's the greatest need you have? They said, we need a new furnace. We gave them $5,000 for a new furnace. I said, if you ever need anything else, let us know, because we want to see you, do well. And I left, and then like 3 or 4 years later, I woke up, got an email one day, said, we're ready. No strings attached. They turned it over to us. Same thing, same story. You know, it's not quite had the turnaround in attendance that Fairfax did. Its attendance has grown. It's close enough where people from Mount Pleasant will go over there and worship. But they have a youth program now that ministers to how many kids, Steve? 30 to 40, where they never had any students before. They have an after-school program that has kids that come in that they minister to, and all of our impact campuses get involved with local elementary schools, and we just find any way possible to serve the community and the neighborhood, because John 1:14, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood, and all of them have new life as a result. We incurred significant expense for Fairfax and Bethany, because for years and years and years they weren't able to do any preventative maintenance. They weren't able to solve any problems. I don't even like saying out loud how much money we spent. It makes me feel sick in my stomach sometimes. Not for what we did, but just how much it cost. And how much it cost to remodel that building down in Old Southside was pretty incredible too. But what we want to do is we just want to help churches that are in decline with the threat of having to close their doors become vital in their neighborhood again. Mount Pleasant years ago could have done the traditional multi-site model that so many megachurches do today, you know, where you just go to another suburb and you build a building and you just video broadcast your service into that place. And we could have done that easily. We have the resources to do that. I'll just be honest and tell you that that's never been on my heart. I've never had that as a part of a vision for the future. Maybe it's because I grew up in such a small church and I spent so much of my life in small church when I was younger. But we have a heart for churches to impact their community, regardless of what size they are. And so I don't remember, I was telling Bill when we were driving over again, I can't remember exactly how Claremont became on our radar, or we got on Claremont's radar. I mean, it's through conversations with Andrew and our executive pastor and some mutual people that we know. But we just wanted to come today and just tell you this is another option that's available to you. And we have a proven track record right now for how we do this. We've learned so much more about how to do this in the right way. But when I stand in your parking lot and I look at your building and I look at this neighborhood around me, I will tell you from my heart, I don't see any single reason why this can't be a vibrant neighborhood church reaching the people who live in this neighborhood. Does it mean there will have to be some change that happens? Yeah. Because the reason why Fairfax got the way it did and Bethany got to the way it did is because its neighborhoods changed, but they never changed. The church never changed. And I'm not talking about change in the sense of compromising the gospel or the truth of God's word, because we would never do that. But I'm talking about finding ways to meet people right at the point of their need with the good news about Jesus, and that he came to give them a new and a better life. And that's what's really on our heart with our impact ministries. So having said that, I'll stop right there and just give you an opportunity to ask me any questions you might have. And I will do my very best. I, along with Bill and Steve, will do our very best to answer them. But I want to tell you one last thing, because I want to be really upfront with you, okay? And there's a reason why I asked Bill to come with me, okay? Because I'm on a timeline at Mount Pleasant. I'm retiring from full-time ministry at the end of June of 2024, so just about another year. But Bill is here representing our elders to tell you that we are deeply committed to impact ministries. It is not something that's just a passing fancy with me, but it's something that will be a part of the DNA and the future of Mount Pleasant, as long as the Lord allows us to live in this world before he takes us home, okay? I want to be really clear with you about that. I'm not going away anywhere. I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing. I might come and go to church here with you. I don't know. But I just want you to know that. I mean, this came from me originally, but it's not going to leave or end with me, okay? All right. Anybody? Anybody at all? Nothing you can't ask me. Yeah.
Explain what an acquisition means to this church.
We take what? Yes, we would take. We know you have debt, and it would mean that it would just basically mean that you completely turn everything over to Mount Pleasant Christian Church. So it becomes a part of Mount Pleasant Christian Church. I mean, is there a more detailed way to explain that, Steve, that you know of? I will tell you one of the interesting things that happened at Fairfax and Bethany is that they voted unanimously to allow us to acquire the church. But after they voted, not everybody stayed. In fact, most of them didn't stay, which, was sad. In part, we would have preferred that they would stay and we could do this together. But I think some of them were just tired. They've been fighting to keep their church going for a long time. Some of them did not live in the neighborhood any longer, and they just saw it as an opportunity for something new. But that was interesting. But yeah, it just means only reason why I hesitate because I don't want the heavy-handed language to make it seem like we're heavy-handed. But we just take over everything. Our elders become your elders, we have a full staff, it's one of the beauties of it. So we just have this incredible communications team. And now your church has access, or this campus has access to all of this communication, this incredible facilities team, that you have access to all of them and taking care of your facilities. We just have this incredible, we have about 50 staff people, and they give their time and their talents and their gifts to do things in these churches that they could never have been able to do on their own. Yeah.
Just want to give some context to that, right? So we've been through a lot over the last year as we've made the decision to replant. So a lot of the things that you had to go into Bethany and Fairfax and do, we've already done those. Right? Like all of that has already cleared the deck. The big change, and actually before we get there, there's essentially one change in talking about working with this impact thing as opposed to what we've been talking about. But this is going to be a new church. It's going to be resourced by something that we couldn't provide when we were going to do the Nexus model. The Nexus model is, hey, we're going to drop a church planner in there. He's going to have to raise funds. He's going to have to raise support. He's going to have to meet people in the community. He's going to have to do all the administrative stuff. He'll have backing, but not like this. This model drops a pastor in to be the neighborhood pastor, to love on people, to create a community of believers in a neighborhood to share the gospel, and takes, as a pastor, takes all the stress of being a pastor away, right? All the other stuff that has to happen, they handle that, they take care of that, right? So instead, we end up with a result of, we're still a new church, right? We're still starting a new thing. But it is resourced by what Mount Pleasant does and what the Impact Center does. So the big change is autonomy, right? We go from trying to start our own new church, which I'm going to be honest with you is very, very difficult, and we knew it was very, very difficult, to this model, which we go into a partnership with them. We go into an acquisition with them so that they're responsible for the financial stuff, the upkeep of this building, the staffing. It's much easier to hire somebody to come be a part of the Mount Pleasant system than it is to just find a church planner and have them be autonomous. So we give up autonomy in this model for sure. And yet the work of the gospel proceeds as effective, if not more so, than any of the other directions we've talked about.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll get everybody.
You may have touched on talking about staff. There's always the workers of few. And how do you overcome that outside of prayer?
For staff?
Staff, workers,
Oh, volunteers? Okay. Well, we have, we would hire staff accordingly to what we perceive to be the need. So everybody has their own pastor. At Old Southside, we have another young man on staff that's like next gen or student ministry, and he also goes over and serves at Fairfax on Wednesday nights. We have people hired at Bethany for the after-school program, and so for staffing goes, we would do like an inventory of the needs and the ministries of the church, and we would hire accordingly, whether it be full-time or part-time, depending on the circumstance. And then we would just help you develop a volunteer system, a system to recruit and train people to serve in the different ministries, much like what we do at Mount Pleasant. Because we have hundreds and hundreds of people serving as volunteers at Mount Pleasant. So we would bring our system to you and the people that were here. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, sir.
In the last several months, I've had several people who have asked me, I thought that church was closed. They've gone by. There's no sign out front. There's no time when we meet.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing out front. We need to become alive again.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is the way that can happen, so be it.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah.
There's no sign out front. There's nothing there.
Yeah. And
I have no idea what we're doing here.
yeah, we have a great communications team, and our communications team would be on that with helping you with things that you weren't able to do because you didn't have that kind of you didn't have those positions and those people with expertise. But we would completely transform that part.
We've been going through this process for a while now,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering what is the timeline on something like this?
That's a great question.
Next question?
From a What would the timeline be? We've been going through this process for some time now. What would the timeline be if we move forward with you? Well, I would say first of all the timeline would be shorter because we would just begin right away as soon as we took care of the legal aspects of the acquisition and got all that taken care of. We would move right away, and our first goal would be to find a full-time pastor to come in. But before we had a full-time pastor, we would have somebody over here from our existing staff that would be ministering to you on the weekends and in any other ways that we felt like, there was a need. We would move forward right away in terms of doing ministry, but there would be a period of time when we need to do a little bit more of a deep dive in as far as an inventory goes for what the needs were. I will tell you that we've already sent our facilities people over here. We've sent our tech people over here. They've looked at your building, your campus, gone through it, and we have a great facilities director, been with us for a long time. He's got a lot of knowledge. Technical director came and looked at all your sound, lights, audio, visual stuff, to see where you stand on that. So we've already started taking some steps in the event that you would say yes to this, and that's kind of the way we operate. We would be on top of it from that standpoint. It might be a little bit of time before you see a real significant impact because the key is finding the right pastor who has the right heart to lead this ministry. Moving that guy into the neighborhood to learn, to live, to learn, and to love the neighborhood. But on the most practical level, we would just dive in right away. And can I say that I'm so impressed by what I've been a part of this morning? I bet you guys would say the same thing. I love the worship experience. I love how engaged and friendly and connected you guys are. I mean, I just love that. That's been a real blessing for me. I applaud you on that, and because clearly you love this church and you're committed to it. Okay.
I just want to make sure that I want to expand on Tim's question. I don't know, maybe I misunderstood what he was asking, but the people that volunteer here now, can we still be involved in the new
Absolutely. Absolutely. We would.
You will utilize us as well, because I really don't want to give up what I do.
Absolutely.
I
I mean,
love what I do.
we want you to serve. We want you to serve. We need you to serve. Yes. I would not mislead you, and I would say that if there inevitably there would probably some changes that would come along with this, but nothing that would be done quickly without a lot of thought and understanding and things. But yeah, we would need all. My heart's desire would be that you would all stay and that you would all serve, every one of you. But I think we all just have to recognize something along the way, is that this is Jesus's church, right? It's Jesus' church. Mount Pleasant belongs to Jesus. I've been the pastor there for almost 22 years, but it's not my church, right? And I hope and pray that the next guy is a way better preacher than I am, and a better leader, because I love nothing more than to see Mount Pleasant just go to the next level, to not skip a beat. And so I went to a church, my church I went to in Oklahoma was a church of about 125 people, and it had been through a series of church splits and had a lot of problems. After I accepted the call there, I had people call me and say, "Don't do this. Can you get out of it? That's a bad church," But I just felt confident. I felt like that church I just felt like it would be a good fit. And it did. It was a good fit. We went from 125 to 1,000 people in about 9.5 years. But when I got there, there were some difficult moments in the beginning, because there's some changes that needed to be made in order to put the church on a growth track. And a lot of times changes involve people. And it was not like, we don't want you. It was like, we need to do this a different way. Are you tracking with me? It was like, I love you, need you to serve, but we can't keep doing this way, because if we are looking down the road to a stronger future, we just need to make some changes. And that's the only way I know how to answer that question. But yeah. Absolutely. That would be the priority of our heart. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever failed?
Me personally?
As far as your impact, taking over a church.
Not yet. No.
But you have lost a lot of people.
Well, the people at Fairfax and Bethany that chose not to stay would be the people that we lost. But there wasn't a lot of people there in the first place. Remember, each church was down to 30 or 40 people. I'm not minimizing that. Mm-hmm. But they didn't leave because we drove them out. Unless they left because they just didn't like what we were doing. But I can tell you from my heart, all we want to do is see those churches be vibrant in their neighborhoods and reach their neighborhoods. Reach neighbors with the gospel message of Jesus, reach them with meeting needs, giving safe places for their children to grow and learn, and that's the only desire of our heart. So there could be situations where somebody would say, "I don't really like that. I don't like that direction," but it would not be a matter of right or wrong. It would be a matter of preference. Does that make sense? So.
Yes, it makes sense, but to expand on Linda, you said that some things have to change. So the way we do what we do and what she does and what the rest of us do, we would have to have additional training, or we'd have to change our method of doing it. Is that the way you're explaining it?
Yeah, I would say yes. It's just Sherry, right? It's a hard question to answer, because I don't know what ministry would look like, right when we took over. Would there be a Sunday morning worship gathering? Absolutely there would. Would there be an effort to have a youth program, a youth ministry? Absolutely there would. Would there be benevolence to the neighborhood and community? Yes. Would there be outreach support? Yes, all those things. But you know, each church might look a little bit different in some ways. But each church, you know, if I was to say this, if you have a passion in your heart to serve in the Sunday worship service, there's going to be an opportunity for you to serve, and right on down the line. But it's hard to say exactly, because you know our churches right now, our 3 Impact campuses right now, they don't all look exactly the same. You know, there's a heartbeat that's the same, there's a DNA that's the same, but the specific way things are done is not completely the same in all of those churches.
And we're still learning.
Yeah, we're still learning.
How to best serve and how to best be a gospel presence in these communities. That's why the process that Chris went through is so important. There really is. There isn't a cookie cutter solution to the needs of these communities.
We don't want to replace anybody. We want to give you a better path to be a more effective servant. And
We need to be willing to learn.
yeah, absolutely.
So one of the hallmarks of deciding to go into this replanting process was, let's call it the trauma of what we were going to have to go through, right? Is to leave everything behind. That's why the sign's gone, right? We had an identity. That identity had a time to end. There's a logo up on the screens. That logo's 6 months old, 7 months old, right? When we say that's the way we always done things, you don't get to claim anything more than 7 months because we haven't existed this way for 7 months. So we enter into a new thing. Whatever the new thing is that's coming, we're going to start from scratch. There's no, well, this is what we've done, so let's do that, right? What he's telling you is there are tons of needs for serving in a church, and then there's going to be all types of ways to do it. And as your pastor, we failed at a lot of those things, and that's on me, right? And so they've got some things that work. They've got some people and some systems that they can plug and play a little bit. And so we need to be willing to walk around like this, open-handed, and say, God, whatever you lead us to, we're going to trust you with that. And I may be attached to this thing, but that's my thing, and that's my baggage. And God, I'm willing to put that before you and say, whatever you want from me, Jesus, right? And whether we do this with you guys or we go plant a church, same attitude. So are there going to be things to do? Absolutely. There's going to be more things to do than the people in this room can handle, right? Are they going to be the same things? Maybe, maybe not. That's okay, right? We worship God. We share the gospel with people. We make an impact in the community. We do those things. Who cares what order everything else goes into, right? Trust the people who are doing some of the work and what they've seen. And let's take steps through that. It's going to be hard. It's going to be personally painful at times. But is it my kingdom or is it God's kingdom? God's kingdom.
One thing that you wouldn't lose, in a sense, is your name, because you would become Impact Claremont Christian Church. And I think that's got some meaning to it. I was at Greenwood Park Mall a while back, and with my wife, and we were walking down the mall, and a woman came up to me. I didn't know who she was, and she said, "You're Pastor Chris at Mount Pleasant, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And then I held my breath, you know, because you never know what's coming next. And she said, "Well, we go to Impact Bethany." And she said, "I just want to thank you, because I've never enjoyed being a part of that church as much as I do today." And I think that would be everybody's experience. I don't mean to sound arrogant or anything, because I have nothing but humility in terms of how God works and how He lets us go along for the ride sometimes. But I really believe that's probably a true statement for her, and I think it would be the same experience that any church would have if we entered into the same ministry commitment.
I just have one thing to say.
Wait for the mic.
No, I don't want the mic. Anyway, I just said, the last 7 months, we've been in training for God. And what we have learned is that we're supposed to reach out and share God's word. And it's not about what we do in here. It's what we do outside of these walls. And that's what we need to focus on. In fear, I hear fear of what's going to happen. I'm excited just for for something to happen, is what I see.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I'll add one thing to that. One thing that I would say in advance, and I'll just use Fairfax as an example. Fairfax had stopped reaching their neighborhood, and that's why their church declined. Now Fairfax is reaching their neighborhood. Well, what that looks like is now there are people in the church who are not like the people that were there before. I mean, they are, but they're not. You know what I mean? And you just have to be ready for that, because that's the Great Commission, right? And that's what the future needs to look like. Where I live in Greenwood, Indiana, our church looks like Greenwood, Indiana. Okay? I don't live in Fairfax. I don't live in Claremont. I don't live down south of downtown. Those churches don't look like Greenwood, Indiana, but they're not supposed to, right? So anyway, if there's somebody had the mic over here.
Hi, Chris. I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam.
And I just want to say what you're talking about doing possibly here and what you are doing in other places, I think sounds great. My question, I might need Andrew to hop in on this one. In the past, we've gone through what we've gone through. We basically held a vote to go with Nexus and turn over all control to that. So I kind of have a question, do we really even have any say here? I know I would vote, let's do this. But I don't know, do we have a say in this? Or is this just Nexus is going to say,
Right.
we're going to do this, or hey, do you guys want to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a unique question because that had already happened when the first time. I came over with the executive pastor at our church a few weeks ago and had lunch with Andrew and
Steve Bolin as well.
Steve Bolin, who's on your leadership team, and I know Phil Claycomb, who is the director of Nexus. I've known him for a long time. And so, to be real honest with you, Sam, I don't know that I fully understand the dynamic of what happened in the transfer between Claremont and Nexus. So,
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
you're probably better equipped to address that question.
yeah, the management team's responsible for decisions. That's it. That's cut and dry, the easy way to say it. The management team's responsible for decisions, and right now the management team is 100% enthusiastic about this option. That doesn't sign anything, that doesn't finish anything, but all momentum is in this direction, right? So you guys may have a different perspective about how to proceed, and that's a conversation for the next few weeks. But as of right now, yeah, we understand that the management team's the one that makes decisions. So.
Okay. All right, so I didn't have any part of that. That happened before I showed up. That's not my fault. Yes, ma'am.
I understand you correctly that it would be called Impact Claremont Christian Church.
That's the name that we would use, Impact Claremont Christian Church. Yes, ma'am. So it's kind of like a new beginning, but it's kind of a marriage of the new and the old, for lack of a better word. So, anybody else? Anything you would direct to one of these fellows over here?
The services,
Well, there's a Sunday morning worship service at all of our churches, except Mount Pleasant also has a Saturday night service. Oh, it's different. I mean, at Fairfax and Bethany, they have traditional. We actually went in and removed the pews in both of those churches. We put new flooring down, and we put seats similar to this, and they're set up in a traditional way. But at Old Southside, they meet around tables for their service. So, my guess is that we would eventually go back to having a regular setup with just the chairs and not the tables. Oh, yes, ma'am.
they're saying is we have no say-so. No, it's the committee.
I would defer again to Andrew on that.
I'm just going to stand right here. I said that. Yeah, I'll give you my address. You can send the ticking things there. Yeah, it was me. That is the decision when we all voted, and we voted 51-2 to adopt those motions last year. Part of adopting those motions was that leadership of the church rests with the management team, which is me, Steve Bolin, Keith Wood from CFR, Spark Ball from Nexus, and Phil Claycomb from Nexus.
Yes, sir.
So as long as you're there, then
So Andrew, this is somewhat, I guess, aimed at you, but okay, so we have some of our former elders here. We have our two pastors here. And so I guess my question, and I would be asking is, so what do we have to do to, I guess, gain or to move forward on this? I mean, you know, I'm like Sam. I think this is a great idea. I mean, so my question would be, you know, before we let Chris, Bill, and Steve out of here, you know, is there some way to get some closure today to say, well, you know, what do we have to do on our side, you know, and through the management team to, you know, either, you know, come to a decision one way or another on this and either move forward on it or not. But is there some way to get some closure before we leave here today?
No. I'm just thinking of how I define the term closure. Can we sign paperwork before they leave today? No. We can't do that. So that option's off the table. Again, the management team is primed to say yes. Today was a big step having Chris here and letting him meet you and see what your hearts were, frankly, and see where your mindset was. The line that came to me earlier in the week was, do the pitchforks come out, right? And that's why we have the metal detectors outside today. So today was a big step in that, and then there's going to be more conversation and see what due diligence is required from Mount Pleasant and impacts, and we're going to continue to make steps forward towards that.
My executive pastor would get involved. The executive pastor of our church oversees all of the, you know, day-to-day operations and like the detail type things. I don't normally get involved in the weeds of those other than just a consultant, you know, and an advisor. And so he would get really deeply involved with making sure that we understood all the legalities that needed to happen. And we have more insight into that today than we did in the past because we've done this twice now with two other churches. But we also have attorneys in our church that help us out when we have these needs. And we would get all those people involved just to make sure that there was nothing, you know, unusual or different about this circumstance. And we did everything, you know, we all, you know, as a part of our Christian commitment, we want to do things, make sure we do things right and in a way that would honor God, and so we would learn more about that. This I will just tell you, for us, this happened very fast. Okay, this happened very fast. I'm so glad to be here today, but it happened very fast, and so. And
I asked Aaron Gable, who's the executive pastor, I asked him to hit the fast forward button, and that's why it's happened fast.
Andrew,
Hi.
could we have a show of hands of everyone who is here today as to how you feel about what was presented today, and if you'd like for Andrew to pursue us moving in that direction, and see if it is possible for us to move in that direction now, with Lexus involved in this equation also now. How many of you would be in favor of doing what we're talking about now today? Okay, Andrew?
Oh, yeah, dude.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we probably kept you longer than you normally stay. I'm sorry for that, but thank you so much for allowing us to come and be a part of this. Thank you for how kind and gracious you were to all of us. Very welcoming. More people said hi to me today than do it. No, I'm not kidding. Just kidding. Well, you have been trained, and you've been trained really well. I mean, there's clearly, this is a very welcoming, friendly church, and we would just love to see that be a strength moving forward as we find a way together to reach your neighborhood. My understanding is there's a Baptist church down the street that is now a mosque. That just breaks my heart. I'm sure it does yours as well. And that's not what we want to see happen. We want to see the good news of Jesus change people's lives and families. And we believe that he can. I believe that he can because he changed mine, right? And I'm sure you would say the same thing. So thank you so much. Thank you. I'll let you pray us out, okay?
All right. We'll pray. They'll still be around if you want to pester them. I'll probably run away fast so the arrows can't catch me. Just take some time to consider what God's doing. And might happen fast, but I guarantee you if we had had this conversation a year ago, it wouldn't have even happened. It took a year. It took the going through what we've gone through. It took the shaping and the work that God was doing in us for us to be able to match a moment and meet the circumstances, right? To get our heads around things, to get our hearts around things. That's right. All in God's time, right? Might be uncomfortable sometimes, but the waiting is part of it. So I'm excited for where things are headed. This option provides a lot of opportunities. I don't want to oversell it. It provides a lot of opportunities that would have been difficult any other way. And I think this is what God's been leading us towards, so I'm excited. So let's pray. Father God, we thank you for gathering us here this morning. We thank you for a movement 199 years ago that originally put a church together, and all the steps along the way and all the people who have followed you and made an impact and left a legacy. We seek to take steps forward today that lead us towards being effective disciple makers, to spread the gospel, to see your kingdom grow. Not for us, but for you, because our lives are about you and what you call us to. We seek after your heart and your will. We seek after your people to see their lives changed, to give them the hope that we carry around with us each day because of the people who poured into us. Help us be willing and ready to pour into others in new ways, in different ways. Just prepare our hearts and minds to be ready for what is to come, Lord. Thank you for all that you've done, and we're grateful for all that we know you will do, and that we get to be a part of it. In Jesus' name, amen.